I was sipping my morning coffee on the porch when I saw it again, Karen's shiny silver SUV crawling down my field like it owned the place. She slowed at the massive iron gate I'd installed, climbed out in her bright pink blazer, and wrestled with the lock for a good 30 seconds before she managed to drag it open. Then she drove through, stopped, got out again, and slammed it shut with all the rage of a woman who'd just lost a war she started. I leaned on the railing and smiled. Because 6 months earlier, this same woman, Karen, self-appointed queen of the HOA, thought she could carve a driveway straight across my pasture without permission. She believed a few threats, a few fancy HOA papers, and a fake community vote would scare me into letting her take whatever she wanted. She had no idea what was coming. And she definitely didn't expect that her free shortcut would end up costing her and the HOA over $60,000. Before we get into the story, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there, and if you enjoy HOA revenge stories, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. I guess the best way to explain how this whole circus started is to take you back to the first day I met Karen. The day everything in my quiet, peaceful life began unraveling. I've lived on this land for most of my adult years. Technically, it belonged to my grandfather first, then my father, and now it's a 20-acre stretch of rolling pasture, a patch of woods, a gravel driveway, and a farmhouse that creaks in the winter but holds more memories than I could ever count. My wife and I moved into it right after my dad passed, and fixing the place up was how I coped with losing him. Sanding old floors, patching walls, staining fence. Every nail I hammered into this house felt like keeping a piece of him alive. The land sits right off a rural road. One single gravel driveway snakes its way up to my porch. Everything else is grass, fencing, and the occasional cow staring blankly at me like I owe it money. It's simple, quiet, peaceful. Exactly what my wife and I wanted when we left the city. Behind my property is another parcel used to be thick woods and old brush that nobody touched for decades. The kind of place deer like to hide in, and raccoons like to hold family meetings. It stayed that way for years, until one day, big orange survey flags started popping up like weeds. I remember standing there, hands on my hips, thinking, well, here it comes. A developer bought the land. And with the developer came heavy machinery. And with the machinery came, unfortunately, the HOA. Now, if you've never dealt with a homeowners association, let me tell you something. There are two types. The rare, quiet ones that just collect basic dues, and the other kind, the kind that breathes rules. The kind that wakes up every morning ready to measure grass height and count how many decorative stones you're allowed to have on your porch. The kind that elects a president with the same energy as a medieval monarchy crowning a queen. And of course, that queen was Karen. I first saw her during the construction phase of the new subdivision. She was standing next to her shiny white crossover SUV, clipboard in hand, talking to a construction foreman like she owned the entire county. She wore a bright pink blazer, you know, that particular shade of pink that says, "I'm about to make this everyone's problem," and she was waving her pen like a conductor controlling an orchestra of chaos. She noticed me standing by my fence and walked straight over like she'd been waiting for this encounter her entire life. "You must be the neighbor on the old farm," she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I nodded. "Name's Jack." She looked over my pasture like it offended her. "This area has so much potential," she said, the word potential dripping with judgment. "We want this whole community to have a more refined aesthetic. Modern, clean, elevated." I raised an eyebrow. "It's a farm." "Well," she replied, scribbling something on her clipboard, "let's hope it doesn't hold back the value of the new homes." That was my first warning sign. But I let it go. I knew people like her: overdressed, overbearing, and overconfident. Harmless, usually. Annoying? Absolutely. Dangerous? Only when given power. And the HOA gave her power. Over the next few weeks, while crews carved out roads and poured foundations, Karen kept showing up. She'd stride past my fence like she was conducting site inspections for NASA. She'd nod politely if our eyes met, but every time she looked at my property, her mouth pinched just a little tighter. Then came the day she first mentioned the driveway. I was tightening a fence post when she approached me with her usual air of forced cheerfulness. "Jack," she said sweetly whenever she started like that, "trouble always followed. Have you ever thought about how wonderful it would be if the community could share a straight, smooth driveway across your field?" I stopped twisting the wire and stared at her. Across my field? She nodded eagerly. Yes, it would connect the new subdivision directly to the county road. Much more efficient than the old access behind the woods. That path is steep and erodes easily. It'll cost thousands to maintain. Your land is flat, open, easy. It's the perfect solution. I blinked slowly. For who? For everyone, Jack. For the community. Except me. She waved that off like my existence was a minor inconvenience. Oh, it's barely an inconvenience. It's just land, right? That was the second warning sign. Karen didn't see my farm, my memories, or my home. To her, it was just land, an obstacle between her and what she wanted. I told her I'd think about it and walked away before she could launch into a lecture about community harmony. At dinner, I told my wife about it. She put her fork down, eyes wide. No, she said immediately, not even for conversation, not even for a nanosecond. It sets a precedent. If you let them in once, they'll take whatever they want. She was right, of course. My wife has the kind of intuition you should probably classify as a superpower. But even then, I didn't realize how far Karen was willing to go. A week later, she returned with a new pitch, this time more polished, more official, and packed with HOA jargon. She brought papers printed with the HOA logo and a syrupy smile that told me she practiced the whole speech in the mirror. Jack, the HOA has voted to request temporary access across the eastern edge of your pasture strictly for construction vehicles, 6 to 12 months. We'll compensate you, of course, $200 per month, and we'll restore the land afterward. I crossed my arms. Restore it how? Reseed, regrade whatever you need, she said lightly. This is just temporary. Once the subdivision is complete, we'll use our permanent access road. My wife wasn't home at the time, and I'll be honest, seeing Karen suddenly acting reasonable threw me off. $200 a month wasn't huge money, but it wasn't nothing, either. And the eastern edge of my pasture wasn't prime land, mostly grass. I didn't rely on heavily. I told her I'd think about it overnight. That night, my wife and I had the debate again. She still disagreed strongly. But I was tired of arguing, tired of Karen's constant presence, and tired of thinking I was being unreasonable just because I didn't want to share my land. And against my better judgment, the next day, I agreed. We signed a simple one-page agreement. HOA could use a 30-foot strip along the eastern edge. Temporary construction access only. Maximum of 12 months. Full restoration afterward. Karen beamed like she'd just closed $1 million deal, and for a moment, I actually thought things might go smoothly. But that illusion shattered fast. Because within the first week, I looked out my window and saw not one, not two, but 3 heavy construction trucks barreling straight through the middle of my pasture, completely ignoring the route we agreed upon. They weren't following the edge at all. They were making their own personal highway. I stormed out to confront the foreman. He apologized, said his guys must have misread something, and promised to reroute them. Karen apologized towel, sort of blaming confusion and lack of communication, but the damage was already done. A deep, muddy trench ran right across the field, the kind of thing only time and a lot of hard work could fix. That's when I started paying closer attention. That's when I started documenting. That's when, deep down, I knew letting them use my land had been a mistake. But even then, I didn't know the scale of the storm Karen was about to unleash. If I had known that saying yes would eventually cost Karen and her precious HOA more than 60 grand, maybe I would have enjoyed watching those construction trucks tear up my field a little bit more. But at the time, it just felt like the beginning of a migraine that wouldn't go away. After that first confrontation, the trucks did move back to the eastern edge like we agreed. For a while, things settled into a routine. Construction crews came and went. Dust blew across the pasture every afternoon, and my cows watched the chaos with the same confused expression they use for everything else in life. Still, I kept my guard up. Every week, I walked the length of that 30-foot strip. I took pictures. I recorded dates. I noted how deep the tire ruts were. Not because I enjoyed acting like a paranoid detective, but because something in my gut kept telling me Karen wasn't done. And boy, was that gut feeling right. Around month 4, I noticed something odd. The original construction road on their property, not mine, was practically untouched. Grass was growing tall around it, like no one had driven on it in ages. Meanwhile, my pasture was being used non-stop. One afternoon, I saw a group of subcontractors pull over in the middle of my field for lunch, sitting on the tailgate, laughing, leaving their soda cans right in the grass. I drove over in my ATV and asked politely if they could move to the edge by the gravel road instead, reminding them it was private property. They looked around at the wide-open pasture and said, "It's HOA land, right?" Karen said this whole thing was approved. I clenched my jaw so hard I'm surprised I didn't crack a tooth. "No," I said slowly. "This is my farm, my land. This is temporary access only." One guy scratched his head. "Really? She talks like she owns the whole thing." "Oh, she tries," I muttered. I cleaned up the cans after they left, not the first time, certainly not the last, then went back to my house, irritated but trying to stay patient. I didn't want to blow up over something small. But small things pile up, and eventually, they turn into avalanches. The first avalanche came at the 9-month mark. The subdivision was nearly complete. Siding was up. Driveways poured. Families had already started moving in. I could hear kids shouting in the distance, see dogs running, hear the constant beep 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 of trucks backing up, and yet nobody stopped using my pasture. At that point I figured, okay, maybe they're just lazy, using the shortcut until they finish the last houses. So I walked over to the subdivision to politely remind them that the agreement expired in 3 months and they needed to plan on transitioning to their own access. I thought that was reasonable. But when I arrived, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Karen had installed signage. Big, shiny HOA-approved metal signs with green arrows labeled Community Access Road pointing across my property. My property. My private property. I stood there staring at the sign like it was a UFO that landed in broad daylight. "How long has this been here?" I asked one of the workers. "Couple weeks, maybe," he replied. Karen said the community voted to make it the main entrance because the other road isn't safe. I almost laughed, or cried, or screamed. Instead, I went looking for the Queen of Pink Blazers herself. I found her inspecting a newly planted row of shrubs near Lot 14, instructing a landscaper to move 1 4 inches to the left for symmetry. "Karen," I called, trying to keep my voice level. She turned, smiled that waxy smile of hers. "Oh, Jack, isn't the new community beautiful? It's really coming together. I need to talk to you about the signs." "Oh, aren't they nice?" she said. "We chose a matte finish to avoid glare. You put them on my land. It's community access, Jack." "No," I said firmly. "It was temporary. For construction only." Karen's posture shifted, like a cat fluffing its tail before attacking. "Well," she said with a syrupy tone, "after using it for so long, the HOA voted to designate it as the official community driveway. It's been in continuous use for nearly a year now, which legally establishes a right-of-way easement." I blinked. "You think you've established a prescriptive easement?" "That's what Google says," she replied proudly. I almost burst out laughing right there. "Karen," I said slowly, "you don't get prescriptive easement when you're using land under a signed permissive agreement." She folded her arms. "If you want to fight it, talk to our lawyer. But just know the HOA has a much bigger budget than one farmer." One farmer. She kept saying it like it was an insult. I guess she thought I should be offended. I wasn't offended, but I was officially done playing nice. I went home and told my wife everything. She sighed, rubbed her temples, and said the words I should have listened to 12 months earlier. I knew she'd try to take the whole thing. The next morning, I drove straight to a real estate attorney. I handed him the contract, the photos, the payment receipts, and every single text and email Karen had sent. He flipped through everything with the same expression a doctor might have when explaining to a patient that WebMD is not a medical degree. "Yeah," he said finally, "they're completely wrong. There's no easement here, not even close. So I can shut the road down?" I asked. "You can," he said carefully, "but they'll fight back and it'll cost money. If you want to avoid a court battle, your best bet is to find leverage and push them into compliance." "Leverage," I repeated. That word stuck in my head like a seed. On the drive home, I kept thinking about the contract, what it said, what it didn't say. The wording nagged at me until I finally pulled the document out again, reading it line by line at my kitchen table. And there it was. The contract allowed access, but it didn't forbid gating, or locking, or securing, or monitoring, or restricting access in any reasonable way needed to protect livestock and property. And something inside me clicked. I didn't need to shut down the road. I just needed to make it so painfully inconvenient that Karen and her HOA would beg me to take it off their hands. That night, I paced the living room, outlining ideas. My wife watched me with a knowing smirk. "You're planning something," she said. "I'm planning," I replied. "To give them everything they insisted they wanted, in the most legal, most annoying, most petty way possible." She crossed her arms. "How petty?" I smiled. "Maliciously petty." And then I explained my plan, every step, every detail, every moment of carefully calculated compliance. She listened, eyes widening, then laughed until she had to wipe tears from her face. "Oh," she said breathlessly, "Karen is going to hate this. Oh, she would. She really, really would." Because the next phase of my plan would change everything. Karen thought she had taken something from me, but she had no idea I was about to take everything back. I didn't put my plan into action right away. No, that would have been too easy for Karen. I needed her to think she'd won. I needed her to feel comfortable, so comfortable, that when the hammer finally dropped, it would hit her so hard she'd still be stumbling months later. So the next time I saw her, I approached calmly, hands in my pockets, wearing the same friendly smile she always pretended to have. "Karen," I called out as she was directing a landscaper on where to place her beloved HOA-approved mulch. "Got a minute?" She turned, suspicious but curious. "Make it quick, Jack." "I've been thinking about what you said," I began. "About the community needing access. I don't want to start a legal war. We're neighbors, after all." Her shoulders relaxed a little. She tried to hide it, but the relief was there. She thought her intimidation tactics had worked. Her chin lifted, and she gave me that smug little half-smile I'd come to hate. "Well," she said, "I'm glad you've come to your senses." I ignored the jab. "I'm willing to let the HOA continue using the same route across my property," I said gently. "No need for court. No need for arguments." She blinked, surprised. "You are?" "Sure," I replied, "but I do need to make some adjustments, just to protect my livestock and my liability." The word liability made her frown, but she tried to keep her posture confident. "What kind of adjustments?" I pulled out the agreement and tapped the section about protecting property and livestock. "Since the cows will be moving back into that pasture soon," I said, "I'll need to install gates at both ends of the route. Heavy farm gates, locked gates." Karen's face froze. "Locked?" she repeated. "Of course. Can't have the cows wandering out onto the road. You'll get a key, obviously." She opened her mouth, closed it, then snapped. "That's completely unnecessary and unreasonable." "Is it unreasonable?" I asked evenly. "To protect my animals on my own land?" She hesitated. I pressed on. "The contract allows access. It doesn't say how I must maintain the area. And the law is clear. Livestock property owners can secure their land however they see fit, especially when there's outside traffic involved." Karen looked like she had swallowed a lemon whole. "I'll give you one key per gate," I added. "Just like anyone else using private property would get." She tried to rally. "This feels like retaliation, Jack." "No," I said firmly. "This is compliance. You said you have a right to use the road. I'm making sure you use it responsibly." Her eye twitched. "What if we refuse?" "Then," I said calmly, "I'll install the gates anyway, without giving you keys. And you can take me to court to prove your prescriptive easement. But my lawyer is very excited to argue that case." That did it. Her mouth snapped shut. She knew deep down that the easement thing was flimsy. Her confidence was an act, and it cracked under the slightest pressure. She threw her hands up. "Fine, whatever. Install your stupid gates." No sweeter words had ever been spoken. The next week, the gates arrived. Big ones. Heavy steel farm gates with thick latch assemblies and padlocks that could probably survive a tornado. I positioned them strategically far enough from each other to require real effort, and placed exactly so drivers had to stop, get out, unlock, open, drive through, stop again, close, and relock. The day they went up, my gate installer, a guy named Bruce who'd been farming since the Stone Age, took one look at the subdivision across the pasture, then smirked at me. "Neighbor trouble?" he asked. "HOA trouble," I corrected. His smirk widened. "Say no more." Once the gates were up, the real show began. The first time a resident tried to drive through, she didn't even slow down at the first gate. She had to slam her brakes when she spotted it. I watched from my porch, sipping coffee, pretending to be surprised. She climbed out of her SUV, heels sinking into the soft dirt. What is this?" She yelled toward the sky like God himself owed her an explanation. Then she saw the lock. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." She wrestled with the key Karen had given her, muttering curses under her breath. When she finally got the gate open, she drove through, only to find the second gate on the far end. The slamming of her car door echoed across the pasture. That scene repeated itself over and over for the next week. Every single driver, SUV doors slamming, people stomping, complaining, swearing. Every sound was pure music to my ears. But that was only phase 1 of the plan. Phase 2 began when I moved the cattle back into that pasture. You see, I leased part of my land to a local farmer, Old Man Harris. Tough as nails, drinks black coffee like it's water, and follows every rule in his lease agreement like the Bible itself wrote them. And the number 1 rule? Gates stay closed, no exceptions. I reminded him loudly, clearly, and with a wink that the gates must remain locked at all times to protect the cows. He nodded, smiled, and said, "Well then, I'll make sure no outsiders leave 'em open." And he meant it. The next morning, a herd of 38 cows thundered back into the pasture like an occupying army. They wandered across Karen's precious community driveway, trampling over tire tracks, sniffing at SUVs, and generally reminding everyone that this was cattle country, not suburbia. That's when the real chaos began. Cars had to dodge cows. People honked. Cows, offended at the noise, stared back with the slow-burning fury of animals that know they weigh 10 times more than you. And of course, with cows everywhere, the likelihood of someone forgetting to close the gate became infinitely more dangerous. 3 days into cow season, it happened. A resident left the far gate open. Just a crack. Just enough. One of Harris's cows, an especially curious one named Dolly, wandered through and ambled up toward the county road. Luckily, I spotted her before she got too far. I grabbed a scoop of feed and coaxed her back with some gentle bribery. But the incident was serious enough. I called my attorney. Within an hour, a formal notice was drafted. If any livestock escapes or is harmed due to negligence in closing and locking the gates, the HOA will be held financially responsible for all damages, medical care, recovery costs, and potential liabilities related to traffic incidents. I had it delivered the next morning. Karen nearly exploded. She came storming across my field, stomping like she wanted to leave craters behind her. Her pink blazer was flapping behind her like a superhero cape if the superhero was powered by pure rage. "This is ridiculous," she shouted before she even reached my porch. "You're using these cows to harass us." "Karen," I said calmly, "they're cows. They don't harass. They just exist. You're making it impossible for people to get home. You insisted on using the road," I reminded her. "I'm simply maintaining it as required by law. It's a nightmare." "Then fix your own access road," I said with a shrug. "Or stop using mine." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "This isn't over." "Oh, I know," I said cheerfully. "We haven't even gotten to the part where winter comes. Because let me tell you, watching HOA residents climb out of their warm SUVs into freezing wind, unlock an icy padlock with numb fingers, then fight a stubborn gate covered in frozen mud, that's when the real satisfaction began." But Karen didn't know yet. And she definitely didn't know the final offer. I'd soon deliver the offer that would cost her more than she could have ever imagined. Winter came early that year, and when it arrived, it didn't tiptoe in gently. It slammed the door open with a freezing gust of wind and dumped half a foot of snow across my pasture overnight. I woke up to white fields, ice-crusted fences, and the distant sound of someone screaming at a frozen gate. I didn't need to check who it was. I stepped onto the porch with a mug of hot coffee, the steam rising like smoke signals against the sharp morning air. Sure enough, at the far gate, a bundled-up HOA resident was wrestling with the padlock like it was an anaconda trying to swallow his hand. Every few seconds he'd hop up and down, blowing into his gloves, cursing the universe and kicking the bottom rail. A minute later, he slipped on a patch of ice and fell right on his back. I winced sympathetically, mostly sympathetically, and watched him lay there for a solid 10 seconds. Staring up at the sky like he was questioning every life decision that had led him to this frozen hell. Eventually, he staggered up, got the gate open, drove through, and repeated the entire process at the second gate. That was the moment I realized something important. My plan was working even better than I expected. The gates weren't just inconvenient anymore, they were soul-crushing. And with the snow piling up, the mud underneath freezing into uneven ridges shaped by cow hooves, The driveway had transformed into an off-road obstacle course that could have been featured on a survival show. Every time a car bounced through the ruts, I could practically hear the suspension groaning. But the worst part for them was the cows. Cows don't care about weather. They don't care about cars. They don't care about people yelling at them. They just stand there chewing cud, looking mildly amused by the chaos around them. And with the pasture shrinking in the cold, they started gravitating toward the warmth of running engines. One morning, an SUV stopped at the first gate and 5 cows crowded around it like they were inspecting a new attraction at the county fair. The driver honked repeatedly, but the cows didn't move. One even licked the rearview mirror. I nearly dropped my coffee laughing. But not everyone found it funny. By mid-December, the complaints started rolling in. Not to me, oh no, they flooded Karen's inbox, voicemail, and probably her nightmares. People were furious. "This is insane. My kids are late for school because of that stupid gate. I almost hit one of Jack's cows. We can't even get Amazon deliveries anymore. Why isn't the HOA fixing the main road like we were supposed to?" Those were my favorites, the residents slowly realizing that the problem wasn't me, it was Karen. And then came the night everything boiled over. It was around 7 p.m., heavy snow falling, when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find 2 HOA residents both bundled in winter gear, faces red from the cold and from sheer frustration. Before I could say a word, the taller one blurted, "Jack, please tell us there's a way to get rid of these gates." His friend nodded vigorously. "We're begging you." My wife slipped on the ice last week trying to open the gate. She sprained her wrist. I raised an eyebrow. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," the first guy said, voice rising, "we're tired of Karen pretending everything is under control. She says you're doing this just to spite the community. She says the HOA owns the road now." I chuckled. "Does she also say she's a lawyer?" They exchanged a look that told me the answer was yes. "Look," the shorter guy said desperately, "is there any way, any option where we don't have to deal with these stupid gates anymore?" Oh, there was. I'd been waiting for this moment for months, but I wasn't ready to drop the hammer just yet. The final blow needed to land with maximum impact politically and financially. And that meant one thing. Karen herself had to break first, so I put a friendly smile on my face. "I'm sorry," I said, "but according to the contract and state law, the gates are necessary to protect my livestock and maintain my property. If the HOA doesn't like it, they can always improve the original road on their own land." The men sighed in defeat. "That road's a mess. Karen said it would cost too much." I nodded slowly. Then she should have thought of that before she decided to hijack my pasture. Their shoulders slumped as they trudged back through the snow, defeated. But something interesting happened next. The very next week, the HOA held a large emergency meeting. How do I know? Because they held it outdoors, at night, in the cold, on the little grassy field near their entrance, and voices carry remarkably far in winter air. My wife and I turned off the porch lights, sat in our rocking chairs quietly, and listened to the show. Karen stood in front of the group, wrapped in that neon pink blazer like a fluorescent beacon of self-righteousness, trying her best to rally the angry crowd. "We will not be intimidated," she declared loudly. "Jack is doing this intentionally. He wants to force us into giving him leverage." Someone shouted, "Leverage for what? He didn't ask for anything." Another yelled, "Why didn't we fix the main road? Weren't there funds for that?" Karen stammered. "Well, those funds were allocated to other improvements." "You mean the decorative boulders at the entrance?" Someone snapped. Karen stubbornly lifted her chin. "Those were necessary aesthetic upgrades." The crowd erupted in chaos. From my porch, I heard everything. "This is your fault, Karen. You said the driveway deal would save us money. You told us it was temporary. My husband slipped on the gate last week. You owe us for that. Why should we all suffer because you didn't want to spend money on a road we already owned?" My wife leaned over and whispered, "I almost feel bad for her." I smirked. Almost. The shouting went on for nearly 20 minutes. Finally, someone yelled above the noise, "Then what's the solution? What do we do?" Karen hesitated, and in that hesitation, she lost control. A man in a heavy coat stepped forward, one of the ones who visited me earlier. "There's only one option," he said. "We need to negotiate with Jack." The entire group murmured. Karen's voice sliced through the air. "Absolutely not." But the crowd was no longer listening to her. They turned toward the man. "What did he say?" Is he willing to remove the gates? What's the deal? Can we buy the land? That last question was the spark. The idea spread like wildfire. We should just buy it. Yes, if we owned it, we could fix it. Then no gates. It becomes OUR responsibility, not Jack's. Karen exploded. No, no, no! That strip is not worth buying. It's too expensive. It's unfair, someone shouted. Better than dealing with your mistake. Someone else added, if we have to choose between Karen stepping down or paying for the land, I'll pay double. The crowd roared in agreement. Karen realized she was losing her crown. That evening marked the beginning of the end for her, and the beginning of my final move. The very next morning she came marching across my field, leaving angry footprints in the snow. She pounded on my door. Jack, she seethed, we need to talk. I opened the door slowly. About the gates? No, she snapped through clenched teeth. About your proposal. I smiled politely. Oh good, I was wondering when you'd come around. She glared. You planned this? No, I said. You planned everything. I just complied. She looked like she wanted to scream. But she swallowed it down and forced out the question she'd been trying to avoid for months. How much? Ah. Finally, I gestured for her to step inside. Let's discuss it professionally. And that was the moment the final act of this story truly began. Karen stepped inside my house like every molecule of oxygen offended her personally. She brushed snow off her blazer, stomped her boots on the mat, and held her chin high, as if she still had some upper hand in this whole disaster. Let's get this over with, she said sharply. I gestured toward the kitchen table, where I had already laid out a folder. Not because I expected her exactly that morning, but because I knew, sooner or later, she would show up. People like Karen don't fold gracefully. They reach a breaking point, and then they come crashing in like a hurricane. She sat, crossing her arms so tightly it looked like she was trying to hold herself together. For once, she didn't have a clipboard or a pen, nothing to give her the illusion of power. I sat across from her, calm as a winter pond. You asked how much, I said. So let's talk numbers. Karen narrowed her eyes. We're not paying you a fortune for a strip of land the width of a sidewalk. It's not the width of a sidewalk, I corrected. It's 30 feet wide and a quarter-mile long. Valuable road frontage. It's useless land, she countered instantly. Funny, I replied, because your entire community relies on it to get home. Her jaw clenched. I opened the folder and pulled out a printed appraisal report. I had the strip surveyed and appraised by the same company the county uses. Fair market value is $40,000. She exhaled sharply, like I'd slapped her. 40,000? For dirt? For access, I said. Legal, deeded access. Something your community does not currently have. That's highway robbery. No, I said evenly. It's the value of the land. You asked for a number. That's the number. Karen shook her head violently. The HOA will never agree to that. Never. Then they're welcome to continue using the gates, I said. Indefinitely. Her eyes flashed with fury. You installed those gates just to force our hand. No, I replied. I installed them because my livestock needed security, and you insisted on using my land. The gates aren't leverage. They're a requirement. Your inconvenience is the byproduct of your own decisions. She looked like she wanted to flip the table, but she held it in, gripping the edge of her sleeves instead. I'm not paying $40,000, she said. And I'm going to tell the HOA the land isn't worth it. You can tell them whatever you want, I said, but the price isn't changing. This is a take-it-or-leave-it offer. Then I delivered the final blow. And if you wait too long, the offer might go up. Land values climb. Especially land with new development around it. Her face went pale. You can't do that, she whispered. Oh, I can, I said with a smile. We both know the HOA needs that land more than I need to sell it. She stared at me, shaking with anger, then stood abruptly. I'm calling a meeting. This isn't over. I'm counting on it, I said. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. I sighed in satisfaction. The game had shifted. Karen was no longer in control, she was reacting. And people like Karen hate reacting. For the next 2 weeks, everything on the HOA side descended into chaos. Residents continued battling the gates, snow, mud, and cows. Delivery trucks refused to enter the pasture. Carpool parents cursed into the wind every morning. One SUV even got stuck in a deep rut, and 3 residents had to push it out while the cows watched like amused bystanders. Rumor reached me through the grape Viniaka old farmer Harris that HOA meetings had turned into shouting matches. Apparently, Karen insisted the land wasn't worth buying and that the inconvenience was temporary. But the residents weren't buying it anymore. By week 3, the HOA board voted barely, but enough to formally discuss purchasing the land from me, which meant Karen had to return. She came to my porch again, but this time she didn't knock. She just stood there, arms crossed, face contorted in a perfect mix of resentment and defeat. "We're willing to negotiate," she said flatly. I stepped outside, letting the cold air rush out with me. "Great. The price is still $40,000. You don't want to discuss it?" she asked. "Nope," she bristled. "The HOA thinks it's too high." "Then they can use the gates," she inhaled sharply. "Some residents are threatening legal action." "Let them," I said. "We have a signed contract, detailed documentation, and you have nearly a year of proof your community was using my land permissively, not adversely. Any judge will throw it out." She swallowed, knowing I was right. I leaned against the porch post. "Tell them the price is fair. They need the land. They refuse to improve their own road. And I'm not dropping a penny from that number." Karen looked down at the snow, then at the pasture, then back at me. Her voice trembled, almost like she was struggling to say the words. "The HOA will pay $40,000 if you'll agree to sign over the land." I smiled slowly, deliberately, enjoying every second. "I'll contact my surveyor and attorney. We'll begin the process." She nodded stiffly. "Fine." Then, under her breath, she muttered, "I hope you're happy." "I'm thrilled," I said. She turned, trudging away through the snow like a defeated soldier retreating from battle. But the war wasn't over not yet. The land sale process took weeks. Surveyors came, measured the strip, marked boundaries, and created legal descriptions. Attorneys drafted deeds. A title company verified ownership. Karen attended every meeting, every call, every inspection, arms folded, jaw clenched, acting like she was being forced to swallow gravel. One surveyor whispered to me, "She's a piece of work." I grinned. "You have no idea." When the day finally came to sign the paperwork, the entire HOA board gathered at the title office. Karen sat at the head of the table, like she still believed she ruled the world. I sat opposite her, relaxed and calm. The deed was slid toward me first. I signed it carefully. Then it was passed to Karen. Her hand shook as she scrawled her name, her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes burning holes into the paper. The HOA treasurer then handed me a cashier's check, $40,000. I slipped it into my folder, stood and reached across the table. "Pleasure doing business," I said smoothly. Karen didn't take my hand. I didn't mind. Because the moment she refused, the HOA secretary, clearly fed up with her, muttered, not quietly at all, "This whole thing was your fault anyway." Karen's face flushed bright red, and that's when it happened. A board member of the older slammed his pen down and said, "I'm starting a vote of no confidence. Karen, your leadership has cost this HOA too much already." Karen froze. The room erupted into murmurs. Some nodding, some whispering, some flat out agreeing. Karen's eyes widened. "You can't do that." "We can," the treasurer said, "and we will." I stepped out of the room then, not wanting to grin directly into Karen's unraveling authority. But as I walked past the frosted glass window, I heard shouting hearse echoing into the hallway. It was poetic. A week later, a letter arrived in my mailbox from the HOA. It wasn't a bill, it wasn't a threat. It was an announcement. Karen had resigned, removed, voted out, the queen of pink blazers dethroned by her own subjects. My wife framed the letter and hung it in the mudroom. But the best part? That newly purchased strip of land, now officially HOA property, still ran right past my porch. Every day, cars rolled by on a driveway the HOA spent more than $60,000 to secure and upgrade. And every time I saw a vehicle pass, I couldn't help smiling, because deep down, I knew the truth. If Karen had just respected my land from the start, she wouldn't have lost her driveway, her reputation, and her crown. By the time spring rolled around, the HOA had fully taken over maintenance of the new driveway, their driveway, the one carved right through what used to be my pasture. And let me tell you, watching them deal with the consequences of their own arrogance was more beautiful than the first bloom of wildflowers. Almost overnight, the tone of the neighborhood changed. Without Karen's iron grip, the HOA board began operating more transparently. They sent newsletters. They held open meetings. They even created committees for community harmony and budget transparency. Those committees might as well have been called "Let's Make Sure Another Karen Never Happens Again." But despite the shift in leadership, the driveway saga was far from over. Owning land is one thing. Maintaining it is another beast entirely. The first issue hit them almost immediately: drainage. See, when cars drive through pasture land, especially land with cows, those ruts don't simply disappear. They become trenches, channels that guide rainwater wherever they please. The HOA quickly discovered this when the first major spring storm rolled in. It rained for 6 straight hours, hard enough to make the roof hum like a drum. I watched from my porch as water collected along the sides of the new driveway. Then the trenches filled. Then the water spilled over. And then my personal favorite part, the entire lower stretch of the driveway turned into a shallow river. Cars tried to drive through it anyway, of course. A few made it. A few sank so deep they needed to be pulled out with a tow strap. One minivan sat abandoned for hours until a neighbor came back with a pickup and rescued it. Flooded headlights, mud-caked bumpers, screaming children trapped inside SUVs as their parents cursed the HOA. And the cows? They loved it. They walked right into the muddy stream, splashing around as if they'd been waiting their whole life for a water park to open. It took exactly 2 days for the HOA to receive their first major complaint about driveway damage. And when they called a contractor for repairs, they learned something crucial. Gravel for a quarter-mile road doesn't come cheap. They needed several truckloads, grading, packing, compaction, easily 5 digits of labor. And because runoff carved new channels every week, the driveway kept deteriorating faster than they could fix it. They complained to me, of course. First came an email. "Jack, do you know your cows are walking into the new driveway and loosening the surface?" I responded politely. "They're not my cows anymore when they're on your property. They're on your land, your road, not my problem." A short response followed. Right. Then came the next issue: fencing. The HOA initially assumed the existing fences would be enough to keep the cows away from the driveway. Wrong. The fences were designed for my pasture, not their carved-out driveway. Cows, being talented escape artists with questionable motivation, kept squeezing between old posts and wandering onto the HOA's land. And once they discovered that the gravel warmed nicely in the sun, it became their new favorite lounging spot. The HOA needed to build a proper fence there, fence on their land. And fences? They're not cheap. They hired a fencing company, but even the lowest estimate came in at over $12,000. A board member asked if they could use volunteers instead. That idea lasted exactly 3 hours until someone accidentally dropped a post-hole digger onto their foot and threatened to sue. So, the HOA paid the professionals, and the whining began again. Emails, calls, complaints about cost, complaints about cows, complaints about why a community with a beautiful entrance road ended up using an ugly farm road instead. None of it was my problem, but I enjoyed every second. One evening in late spring, I was sitting on the porch cleaning my boots when 2 residents approached me. These were different from the men who had visited in the winter. These 2 looked defeated, exhausted, like people who had survived a natural disaster made entirely of bureaucracy. They waved politely, and I waved back. "Jack," the first man said, "we just wanted to talk." "Everything all right?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Honestly," he sighed, "no. The repairs, the fence, the maintenance, it's killing us. Our HOA dues went up by almost 40%. People are furious." "Sorry to hear that," I said, "not sorry at all." The second man stepped forward. "We know Karen started this mess, but is there any chance you'd, I don't know, take the land back?" I almost choked on my laughter. He wasn't joking. "You want me," I said slowly, "to buy back the land you bought from me?" "Yes," he said desperately, "we'd pay you a little something for the trouble. Maybe we can figure out a deal, and then you can, shut it down, close the road, do whatever." I blinked. "Gentlemen, I need you to hear yourselves. You bought the road. You voted to buy it. You own it. It's yours forever. But we don't want it anymore," the shorter one said. "It's a nightmare." I nodded thoughtfully. "I warned Karen." "Yeah," the taller one muttered. "We should have listened to literally anyone else." I leaned back in my chair. "I'm not buying it back, and even if I did, I'd still shut it down. So the problem would be the same. The real mistake was not fixing your original access road when you had the chance. They exchanged a miserable look, realizing I was right. "We're sorry about everything," the shorter one said. "We had no idea how much it would cost." "It always costs more than you think," I said gently. "That's the thing about land, and about consequences." They nodded, thanked me for listening, and trudged back through the pasture toward their subdivision. After they left, my wife stepped onto the porch with 2 mugs of lemonade. "Let me guess," she said, handing me a glass. "They want you to save them." "Yep, and you're not going to." "Nope." She smiled. "Good." Summer came, and the HOA spent thousands more maintaining the driveway. They tried adding new gravel. They tried putting up signs telling residents to drive slowly. They tried installing temporary rubber speed bumps, which lasted about 3 days before the cows played with them like toys. Every attempt failed. By fall, one thing became clear. Buying that strip of land had been the single most financially disastrous decision in the HOA's history. It became the neighborhood joke. Parents whispered about it at bus stops. Retirees brought it up during morning dog walks. Kids called it the Great Cow Road. And every time a resident drove past my porch, they avoided eye contact because they knew the truth. All of this was avoidable. If Karen hadn't tried to bully me, if she hadn't made assumptions, if she hadn't weaponized Google law, if the HOA hadn't followed her like obedient ducklings, none of this would have happened. But humans are funny. They believe what they want to believe. They follow the loudest voice, and sometimes that voice leads them right into the mud. The same mud their cars were now stuck in, the same mud the cows enjoyed wading in, the same mud that marked the start of the downfall of Karen's HOA empire. New leadership tried to warn residents. We can't undo this decision, but frustration simmered, and resentment built like pressure inside a boiler, and that pressure would eventually explode. But that's a story for the next part. Autumn arrived with crisp mornings, orange leaves, and a sense of uneasy anticipation in the air, especially on the HOA side of the property line. By now, the Great Cow Road had become a legendary nuisance. Not a week went by without someone getting stuck, scraping their bumper, or filing a complaint about gravel, fencing, or you guessed it, cows. But the financial strain? That's what finally cracked them. The HOA's repair invoices piled up like fallen leaves. Gravel deliveries, fence repairs, erosion control, emergency services after a minivan slid into a drainage ditch. By October, they had spent so much that the HOA's reserve fund dipped below state-required minimums, which triggered a mandatory audit. I didn't learn about the audit from the HOA newsletter. I learned about it from the shouting match that echoed across my pasture on a windy Tuesday afternoon. You can tell a lot about a community by the way they yell at each other. I was on my porch splitting kindling for the wood stove when the first voice rose. "This is unsustainable. We can't keep pouring money into that road." Another voice, sharper, angrier. "Who approved this purchase in the first place? This is Karen's mess, and we're paying for it." Then a third, exhausted voice chimed in. "We wouldn't be in this situation if we just fixed the main access road like we originally planned." Footsteps stomped. Someone slammed a car door. Another person shouted something about budget violations and special assessments. My wife peeked out the window. "Sounds like they're suffering." I grinned. Music to my ears. The thing about HOA turmoil is that once it starts, it doesn't stop. It snowballs, gathering more frustration, more resentment, until eventually it becomes too big for even the board to control. And with Karen gone, the new board members had no scapegoat, just the reality of the situation they'd inherited. Within a week, the HOA sent out a notice. Emergency Special Assessment Meeting Attendance Mandatory. Translation: We need money, and we need it now. Naturally, people panicked. I didn't attend the meeting, of course. I'm not part of their HOA. But I didn't need to be there to hear what happened. Sound travels beautifully across an open field. From my porch, I heard the yelling start before the official meeting even began. "This is outrageous. I refuse to pay another dime for that stupid driveway. My car needs new shocks because of that road. Why are WE paying for his cows?" That one made me laugh. Then came the board president's attempt at calm. "Everyone, please settle down. The special assessment is necessary to restore the reserve fund." Someone cut him off. "Because you idiots spent it all on rocks and fences." The shouting grew louder. Apparently, the proposed assessment was steep, several $100s per household. Not because the land I sold them was expensive, not because of the deed transfer, but because maintaining a quarter-mile driveway across old pasture land was an everlasting money pit, a sinkhole disguised as a shortcut. People began demanding impeachment of the current board. Others wanted to sue the HOA itself. A few insisted the HOA should dissolve entirely. And then, a voice rang out louder than the rest. Just sell the road back to Jack. The eruption that followed was spectacular. I nearly spilled my coffee laughing. The laughter didn't last, though, because moments later, I saw two board members break away from the pack and start walking toward my house. I sighed. Here we go again. My wife squeezed my arm. Be nice. I'm always nice, I said, grabbing my jacket, just not always helpful. When the board members reached the porch, they were visibly distressed, tired eyes, stressed voices, hair disheveled like they'd been running their hands through it for hours. Jack, the first man said, we need to talk. I leaned against the porch rail. About the road? Both men nodded solemnly. We're drowning, the second board member admitted. This driveway is destroying the HOA. The cost is unsustainable. The residents are furious, and Karen's legacy, the first added bitterly, is turning our HOA into a financial disaster. I didn't disagree. So, he continued, we have a proposal. The HOA wants to know if you would consider purchasing the strip of land back from us. I blinked. My land? I said slowly, that you insisted on taking, then insisted on buying, then insisted you could maintain better than me? The first man winced. Yes, I crossed my arms. And what would I do with it? Whatever you want, he said quickly. Shut it down, gate it again, let your cows roam freely, anything. And why, I asked, would I pay money to take back land I didn't want to sell in the first place? They exchanged desperate glances. Finally, the second man spoke. Because the HOA can't afford to maintain it anymore. We're begging you, Jack, please. We'll sell it back at a discount. I almost felt bad, but not bad enough. No, I said simply. They stared at me in disbelief. No? No, I repeated. You made your choice. You voted. You bought the land. You maintain it. The first man tried again. What if we? No, I said firmly. The second man sighed in utter defeat. Then the HOA is going to collapse. Maybe, I said, but that's not my problem. I didn't build a driveway across your land. You built one across mine. They stood there silently as the weight of that truth settled on their shoulders. We understand, the first man whispered finally. We just had to ask. I nodded. And I answered. They thanked me out of politeness, not gratitude, and trudged back across the field, shoulders slumped, looking like two men headed toward a firing squad. That night I watched the HOA implode. Residents yelled at the board. Board members yelled at residents. People stormed out. Someone threw a folder into the grass. A dog started barking at the chaos. And eventually, mercifully, the meeting collapsed in on itself like a dying star. The next morning, an email was accidentally forwarded to me by one of the residents I'd befriended. The subject line? HOA emergency. Vote to dissolve. I sat back, stunned for a moment. Then I laughed so hard my wife had to close the windows. Over the next few weeks, the vote circulated, the arguments flared, and finally, after years of mismanagement and months of financial chaos, the community made their choice. The HOA dissolved, gone, disbanded, wiped off the face of the neighborhood map, and that meant something glorious. The driveway was now the responsibility of the individual homeowners who used it, not an organized board. And once they saw the cost, most of them simply stopped using it. They returned to the original road behind the woods, the one they should have fixed in the first place. Slowly, the community's cars disappeared from the strip of land that had caused so much trouble. Slowly, the gravel faded. Slowly, the fences sagged. Slowly, the road died. Until finally, that long, expensive, painful road became nothing more than a memory, a scar on the land, a reminder of a fight they never should have picked. One quiet afternoon, months after the HOA vanished, my wife and I took a walk along the abandoned driveway. Grass pushed through the gravel. Weeds claimed the edges. One of Harris's cows lazily chewed on an old reflector post. It's like it never even existed, my wife said softly. It existed, I said. Karen made sure of that. She laughed. Are you glad it's over? I looked out across my land, the pasture I'd protected, the home I loved, the quiet I'd reclaimed. Yes, I said, I really am. And as if on cue, a breeze swept across the field, carrying with it the last echoes of that ridiculous HOA drama. All gone now, and peace real, honest peace settled over my land again. When I look back on everything that happened, the money, the arguments, the chaos, it all comes down to one simple truth: respect. Respect for land, respect for boundaries, respect for people who were here long before you arrived. Karen thought power gave her ownership. She thought authority gave her entitlement. But land doesn't bend for ego, and consequences don't care about position. Had she simply asked, listened, and respected the answer, none of this would have happened. But her arrogance cost her community tens of thousands of dollars, her reputation, and ultimately the HOA itself. If there's a lesson in all this, it's this: never mistake kindness for weakness, and never underestimate someone who knows the value of their own land. Let me know in the comments, have you ever dealt with an HOA disaster? And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next one.